Friends, if you're excited to watch the upcoming 2025 blockbuster Hurry Up Tomorrow in English, then you're in for a treat. And if this is your first time visiting our channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any exciting updates. In today's video, we're going to talk about everything you need to know about Hurry Up Tomorrow. From where you can watch it to all the interesting behind-the-scenes facts, this video will cover it all. So sit back, relax, and stay tuned till the end. First of all, we'll talk about what Hurry Up Tomorrow is really about. What's the story? What makes this movie so special? I'll be giving you a sneak peek into the plot without spoiling too much, of course. This is a film that promises to mix high-stakes drama, unexpected twists, and breathtaking visuals into a thrilling cinematic experience. We'll also explore the genre and tone of the movie and what kind of audience it's made for. Whether you're into sci-fi, action, mystery, or emotional storytelling, you'll want to know how Hurry Up Tomorrow fits into your watch list. Then we'll move on to where and how you can watch this film. I'll give you complete details on which OTT platform or satellite TV channel is bringing this movie to your screen, whether it's available for streaming, rental, or theatrical release, and when you can finally watch it from the comfort of your home. You won't have to scroll endlessly through platforms to find it. I've got you covered. But that's not all. We'll also dive deep into the technical aspects of the film. Who's directing it? Who's behind the cinematography and production design? What kind of music can you expect, and who composed it? We'll talk about the people who brought this vision to life, from pre-production planning to filming locations to the post-production magic that ties everything together. If you're someone who appreciates the craft behind the camera, this part will definitely interest you. Next up, we'll get into the budget and the business side of things. How much was spent to make this film a reality? What are the expectations for the box office? Has it broken any records yet? Or is it on track to be one of the biggest releases of the year? We'll go over all the numbers and projections to give you a complete picture. Then, of course, we'll talk about the story of Hurry Up Tomorrow. I'll give you a brief, spoiler-free review of the storyline so you can get a feel for the movie without ruining any surprises. I'll also share my honest opinion on the pacing, emotional beats, action sequences, and whether the story delivers on its promise. We'll take a close look at the film's star cast too, who's playing the lead role, who are the supporting actors, and how did each actor perform. We'll talk about the characters, what roles they play, and whether their performances hit the mark. If you're a fan of any of the cast members, you'll definitely want to know how they shine in this film. And finally, we'll wrap things up with some fun and surprising facts about the movie, little-known trivia, interesting production challenges, and maybe even some Easter eggs to look out for when you watch it. So, friends, make sure you stay with us till the end of the video because this one's packed with everything you need to know about Hurry Up Tomorrow. Let's get started and dive into the world of this exciting new film. 2. Plot and narrative. Alright, let's dive straight into the whirlwind that is Hurry Up Tomorrow. Now, this movie doesn't just walk you through a storyline. It grabs your hand, yanks you through time, spins you around emotionally, and tosses you back in your seat wondering what just happened. From the very first scene, it's clear that this film isn't here to follow a paint-by-numbers plot. Oh no! This is storytelling with a twist, a turn, and a big question mark hanging in the air. The film kicks off not with a hero waking up in bed or a villain plotting something in the shadows, but with a bizarre countdown on a malfunctioning device in the middle of a forest. Yeah, you heard that right. We're not told who owns the device or what it does. We just see it ticking down, and we're already hooked. Then boom, we jump to a crowded city, neon lights buzzing, and we meet our protagonist, Jules. Jules isn't your typical lead character. They're not heroic. They're not tragic. They're just trying to survive a Wednesday that feels like it might never end. Because here's the catch. Time is broken. The movie plays with time like a kid with a new toy. Past, present, and future don't just blur. They collapse into each other. Jules begins to notice that moments are repeating. Conversations glitch. A stranger asks them the same question twice, word for word. A street musician plays the same tune, with the same mistake, every time they pass him. It's subtle at first, but then time fractures completely. And this is where the movie goes from interesting to what in the world is going on. We're thrown into a maze of timelines, where Jules meets different versions of themselves, some confident, some terrified, one who seems to know exactly what's coming and warns Jules not to trust the man in the silver coat. And then bam, cut to black. New setting. A desert, endless and silent. A single monolith stands with strange symbols etched into it. And guess what? That malfunctioning device is there too. Only now, it's counting up. At this point, the film starts to ask big questions without spelling anything out. What is time? Are we moving through it? Or is it moving through us? Jules is thrown into conflict not just with others, but with themselves. Imagine trying to save the world while arguing with a version of yourself who thinks saving it will make things worse. One of the most intense scenes isn't a gunfight or an explosion, but a quiet argument between Jules and their future self about whether love is a reason to change the timeline or a reason to let things play out. The emotional weight builds slowly. You don't even realize how attached you've become to these different versions of Jules until something goes terribly wrong. One version disappears. Another breaks down. And the main Jules starts to unravel under the pressure. And just when you think you're following the path, the movie flips the map again. Enter the man in the silver coat. No spoilers here, but let's just say he's not your average villain. He's got charisma, a calm voice, and a terrifying habit of showing up in the background before he ever speaks a word. Every time he enters a scene, it feels like the film tilts sideways just a little. He's the embodiment of a paradox. He helps Jules, but also seems to be the reason everything's falling apart. The scenes with him are some of the most mind-bending in the movie. He talks in riddles. He remembers things Jules hasn't done yet. And he knows what happens when the countdown hits 0. As we reach the final act, the timelines begin collapsing in on each other. Scenes repeat with subtle changes. Objects shift between frames. You start to wonder if you've seen a moment before or if the movie is just messing with your memory. Characters Jules met earlier reappear in completely different contexts, revealing they were more important than we thought. The tension cranks up not through action, but through confusion. Beautiful, haunting confusion. But then comes the moment. The choice. The scene the whole movie builds toward without you even realizing it. It's not about saving the world in a dramatic explosion. It's about deciding which version of reality to live with, which memory to keep, which regret to let go. It's emotional. It's raw. And it hits hard. The narrative structure of Hurry Up Tomorrow is a controlled chaos. It doesn't hold your hand. It dares you to get lost. But if you give yourself to the story, let go of logic for a bit, and just feel your way through it, the payoff is huge. It's a film that plays with time not just as a gimmick, but as a mirror for the choices we make and the lives we could live. And it does it with style, mystery, and just enough emotional gut punch to make you sit in silence when the credits roll. 3. Character development. Let's talk characters, because Hurry Up Tomorrow doesn't just throw a few quirky personalities on screen and call it a day. Oh no. This film builds its characters like a puzzle, where every piece has jagged edges, missing parts, and hidden layers that only reveal themselves when the story forces them into the light. At the center of this whole temporal circus is Jules. And what a lead! Jules isn't your classic action hero or tortured genius or chosen one. Jules is messy. And that's what makes them so fascinating. They start off just trying to make it through another average, exhausting, nothing-ever-changes kind of day. They've got a routine, a life that feels like it's going nowhere fast, and the kind of weary sarcasm that comes from being let down too many times. But once reality starts folding in on itself, Jules is forced to confront way more than just a broken timeline. They have to face themselves. Literally. Here's where it gets juicy. The movie introduces multiple versions of Jules from alternate timelines, each shaped by different choices, regrets, and events. There's Jules the optimist, who believes everything happens for a reason. Jules the rebel, who's been fighting the timeline for years. And Jules the resigned, who's tired of fighting anything at all. Watching them interact is wild, like looking in the mirror and arguing with the parts of yourself you try to ignore. The character development happens not just through action or dialogue, but through these strange, emotional confrontations with alternate selves. You see Jules wrestling with guilt, hope, ego, and fear, all by clashing with their own doppelgangers. And then we have Cam. Cam starts off as a friend, or maybe more than that, depending on the version of events. They're grounded, funny, and the only person Jules trusts, until trust becomes the biggest question of all. In one timeline, Cam is Jules's anchor. In another, they're distant, cold, almost a stranger. And then there's that version where Cam seems to know more than they're letting on. Are they part of the solution, or are they tied to the problem? Watching Jules and Cam's relationship shift across timelines is like watching a love story told in fragments, each one echoing the last but leading somewhere new. There are scenes between them that are quietly devastating, not because of what's said, but because of what's not. Enter the man in the silver coat. He's not a villain in the traditional mustache-twirling sense.
He's calm.
Chillingly calm. He doesn't threaten, he suggests. He doesn't chase, he waits. And he seems to know Jules better than Jules knows themselves. The creepiest part? He never seems to age, never seems confused. Like he's been watching all the versions of a story unfold at once. And maybe he has. He represents the inevitable, the cosmic what if, the idea that no matter how many versions of yourself you meet, some truths can't be outrun. His character arc is subtle but terrifying, growing more human as the story goes on, which somehow makes him even more unnerving. Other characters sprinkle into the story like breadcrumbs through the timeline, each one bringing something new to the emotional web. There's the scientist who first designed the temporal device, riddled with guilt and 1,000 regrets. There's the kid who appears in different forms throughout the movie, always with the same red notebook, hinting at a connection deeper than anyone understands. Even minor characters in this movie carry weight, because you never know who they might turn out to be in another timeline. But what's really genius about the character development in Hurry Up Tomorrow is that it doesn't tell you when someone changes. It shows you. Jules doesn't deliver a big speech about growth. They don't have a single moment of epiphany. Their transformation is quiet, earned, and often painful. They start the film wanting to escape their life. By the end, they're fighting to understand it, accept it, and maybe, just maybe, find a version of it worth staying in. Every relationship in this film is like a thread being pulled at both ends by different versions of time. Friendships unravel and reweave. Loyalties shift. And the more time breaks, the clearer it becomes that these characters aren't trying to fix the timeline just for the sake of the world. They're doing it to hold on to each other, to hold on to the parts of themselves that still feel real. This movie doesn't just develop its characters, it lets them evolve, shatter, and rebuild across a kaleidoscope of possibility. And somehow, by the end of it all, you feel like you've lived a dozen lives with them. 4. Performances. Let's get into the performances, because Hurry Up Tomorrow doesn't just rely on its mind-bending plot to keep you hooked, it leans hard into the acting. And oh boy, does the cast deliver. From the first awkward glance to the last tear-soaked monologue, these actors are in it for real. You can feel it. No one is coasting. Everyone's playing for keeps. First up, the lead. Let's talk about the powerhouse that is Jules, played by an actor who doesn't just portray a character. They become every possible version of them. They manage to make you believe, without a doubt, that 5 completely different versions of Jules, each with their own quirks, traumas, energy, and purpose, are still all the same person underneath. That takes serious skill. One version of Jules is all nerves and sarcasm, always talking too fast and deflecting with jokes. Another is hardened, silent, and full of quiet rage. And then there's the version who's emotionally shattered, but somehow still hopeful. Each time the camera cuts to a different Jules, there's a shift in posture, voice, eyes, like you're watching a brand new character, but still feel the echo of the original. It's wild. This actor is doing Olympic-level emotional gymnastics and making it look effortless. Now enter Cam, the emotional grounding wire of this twisted timeline circus. Cam's performance is all about the eyes, so much said in the way they look at Jules across timelines. There's love, there's fear, there's betrayal, there's this deep, aching sense of, I've seen this all before, and I don't want to lose you again. One version of Cam is warm and steady, the kind of person who always knows what to say. Another is distant, wounded, and holding on to secrets like they're too heavy to speak aloud. The chemistry between Cam and Jules is electric, not because they're always kissing or crying, but because you believe their history. Even when the script doesn't explain it, the actors do. A glance, a pause,
a sigh.
You feel the weight of 1,000 almosts between them. And then there's the man in the silver coat. This actor doesn't just walk onto the screen. He glides in like he owns time itself. Every line he delivers feels like a riddle wrapped in velvet. He never raises his voice. He never loses control. And somehow, that makes him 10 times more terrifying. There's one monologue in particular, midway through the film, in a scene lit only by flickering street lamps, where he tells Jules about a version of the future that's already happened. His voice is calm, almost gentle, but the way he builds tension with just a slow smile and a tilt of the head? Pure psychological warfare. He doesn't play the villain like a bad guy, he plays him like a cosmic inevitability, and it's chilling. Supporting cast? Oh yes, they understood the assignment. There's a brief but unforgettable appearance by the scientist who created the timeline device, and this actor brings a whole story's worth of regret into just a few scenes. You can see years of ethical breakdown written into every gesture. There's also a young actor playing a mysterious kid with a red notebook who shows up in different realities, and despite barely having lines, they're mesmerizing. Every time they appear, it's like the whole energy of the scene shifts. The kid doesn't do much, but you feel them. That's presence. That's talent. Even the minor characters, random people Jules meets in alternate versions of their life, don't feel like filler. The barista who recognizes Jules in one timeline and forgets them in another. The neighbor who's paranoid in one version and generous in the next. These actors come in for 1 or 2 scenes and still leave an impression. That's the beauty of a film like this. Every small role matters, because every interaction adds a new layer of depth to the multiverse madness. You know a movie's performances are next level when you're halfway through and you forget you're watching actors. You start thinking of them as people, real ones, with memories and secrets and bruised hearts. That's what happens here. These actors don't just read lines. They carry the weight of the story on their backs and somehow make it look like they've been living in this twisted timeline their whole lives. 5. Direction. All right, time to give a standing ovation. Because the direction in Hurry Up Tomorrow isn't just competent, it's the glue holding this entire, beautifully unhinged time-warping odyssey together. The director doesn't just guide the story, they orchestrate it, like a conductor waving their baton at a symphony made of fractured memories, flickering neon lights, and existential dread wrapped in mystery. From the first frame, you can tell someone with a serious vision is behind the wheel. Let's start with tone. You know how some movies can't decide if they're serious or silly, grounded or surreal? Not this one. The director walks a tightrope of moods with total confidence. The tone here is a weird, addictive blend of tension and tenderness. One moment you're laughing at a perfectly timed, deadpan exchange between 2 versions of Jules, and the next you're clutching your seat because the silence between characters has suddenly become terrifying. The emotional switches are fast but never jarring. It's like the director hands you a mood ring that won't stop changing colors, and somehow it works. The mood of the film is soaked in atmosphere. Think rainy alleyways lit by holographic billboards. Think abandoned fields under impossible skies that shift color with the time glitches. The director uses lighting like a mood swing machine, cool blues for confusion, sickly yellows when something feels off, deep reds when the timeline starts to spiral. It's all intentional. It's all controlled. Even when the story gets chaotic, the mood stays razor sharp. You're never just watching scenes, you're feeling them in your bones. Stylistic choices? Oh, buckle up. This film is dripping in visual flair, but not in a hey, look at me being artsy kind of way. Every strange camera angle, every jarring cut, every lingering close-up serves a purpose. There are shots where the background blurs just slightly, enough to make you question if what you're seeing is stable. There's a repeated visual motif of mirrors and reflections, but it's never just for aesthetics. It's storytelling. It's the director saying, pay attention. Things aren't as they seem. There's one scene where Jules walks through a crowd, and the camera never cuts. It spins around them in one long, unbroken take as the crowd shifts in age, clothing, and behavior to reflect different timelines. That shot alone deserves a slow clap. The pacing is an art form in itself. The movie isn't in a hurry, ironically. It simmers, builds. But just when you think you've settled in, the tempo spikes like the beat of a skipping heart. The director knows exactly when to slow things down for maximum emotional punch, and when to hit the gas pedal and send your brain into overdrive. And because the narrative messes with time, the pacing isn't just linear, it's thematic. Moments from earlier return later, with new meaning. Scenes echo themselves, and the rhythm feels deliberate, like time itself is part of the editing process. It's cinematic origami, folding and unfolding layers, always forming a bigger picture you didn't realize was there. And let's talk about how the director works with the actors. Because yes, the performances are brilliant, but you can feel the invisible hand shaping those moments too. The silences aren't empty. The pauses are full of weight. You can tell the director is guiding these performances like a sculptor, shaving off anything that doesn't serve the emotional truth of the scene. There's restraint. No overacting. No flashy dramatics. Just pure, controlled emotional energy that builds like a storm. Also, there's the question of how the story is told. Nonlinear? Absolutely. But not confusing for the sake of being clever. The director drops you in the middle of a puzzle and lets you enjoy the process of figuring it out. There's trust there, trust in the audience to keep up, to catch the hints, to question everything. And that trust makes the experience so much more rewarding. It's not just a movie, it's an invitation to decode something personal. This director doesn't just deliver a story, they create a whole experience. They manipulate time, space, character, and emotion with the precision of a watchmaker and the flair of a magician. By the time you realize what they're doing, you're already too deep to look away. It's thrilling, it's unsettling, it's strangely beautiful. And it's proof that great direction isn't about showing off. It's about making you feel something you've never felt before in a way you didn't even know movies could do. 6. Cinematography. The cinematography in Hurry Up Tomorrow isn't just eye candy. It's a full-on visual conversation happening alongside the dialogue, whispering clues, building tension, and sometimes screaming in your face when things go off the rails. This isn't one of those films where the camera just follows the actors around. Here, the camera thinks, it feels, it spies, it hesitates. It lunges forward when the truth hits and pulls back when characters are slipping away from each other, both emotionally and literally. Let's talk angles. The cinematographer here is obsessed with perspective, and it shows. When Jules is lost, confused, or questioning reality, the camera tilts, ever so slightly, off-axis. It's just enough to make you feel like something's not quite right. You might not even notice it at first, but your brain does. You feel unsettled without knowing why. Then, when timelines start to splinter and characters are seeing alternate versions of themselves, we start getting these eerie mirrored compositions, two Jules in the frame, but neither quite centered. It's brilliant visual storytelling. The symmetry isn't neat. It's fractured, just like the characters. Lighting is where the cinematography absolutely goes off the rails in the best way possible. There's a scene where Jules is in a hallway that flickers between different timelines, and the lighting changes with every step. One moment, it's harsh fluorescent white. The next, it's a warm amber glow, then a shadowy blue that swallows everything but their outline. Each lighting shift signals a new reality, but the transitions are smooth, hypnotic. It's not just functional, it's emotional. Lighting becomes a character. When Cam is honest, the light softens. When the man in the silver coat appears, the shadows stretch and bend like they're scared of him. No need for flashy CGI when the lighting already tells you that reality is glitching. Now, let's talk framing. This film loves to trap its characters in the frame. So many scenes are composed with doorways, windows, mirrors, visual barriers that make the characters feel boxed in, observed, or isolated. Even when they're in wide open spaces, there's a sense of distance. The camera places them small against massive skies, long tunnels, empty streets. It's a visual reminder that even with multiple timelines, multiple selves, and endless possibilities, they're still alone with their choices. There's one especially memorable sequence where Jules stands in front of a giant LED screen showing past versions of themselves on loop, and the camera slowly zooms in until Jules's reflection merges with the digital projection. It's haunting. It's poetic. It's a mic drop moment in visual storytelling. And oh, the motion. The cinematography moves like time itself, fluid, unpredictable, and sometimes jerky in all the right ways. In scenes of emotional clarity, the camera glides smoothly, almost lovingly, letting the moments breathe. But during time shifts or emotional breakdowns, it gets shaky. Not handheld shaky, but rhythmically off, like the film is skipping a beat. One chase sequence between two versions of Jules doesn't just rely on speed. It uses sharp cuts, dizzying spins, and sudden zooms that feel like a camera having a panic attack, pulling you right into the chaos. There's also an insane attention to color. Each timeline has its own palette: muted grays for the emotionally numb version, saturated neons for the chaotic, reality-breaking one, warm golds for moments that feel real, human, grounded. But here's the kicker. As the film progresses, those palettes start to blend. Scenes that start with a cool blue tone subtly warm up depending on the emotional arc. It's like the cinematography is syncing itself with the character's feelings, without a word being said. And then there are the still moments, the pauses, the long, slow shots that hold on someone's face just a few seconds longer than expected. These aren't just for dramatic flair, they're purposeful. They give you space to feel uncomfortable, to reflect, to catch your breath. The cinematographer understands that in a film about time, stillness can be just as powerful as movement. Bottom line, the cinematography in Hurry Up Tomorrow doesn't just decorate the film, it builds the world, plays with your perception, and delivers a whole other layer of narrative that you experience with your eyes and your gut. Every shadow, every reflection, every strange framing choice is there to make you feel the instability of time and the weight of memory. It's visual storytelling at its most alive, and it never lets you look away. 7. Editing and pacing. Let's talk about the heartbeat of Hurry Up Tomorrow, because if the direction is the brain and the cinematography is the eyes, then the editing is the pulse. And what a pulse it is. This isn't just cut and paste editing. It's razor-sharp, mood-controlling, time-bending precision that messes with your sense of rhythm in the best way possible. The editors are clearly having a field day with the timeline concept, slicing and stitching together a narrative that jumps back, forward, sideways, and sometimes folds in on itself like a glitch in a dream. From the very first scene, you can tell this film is operating on a different tempo. There's no slow build. You're thrown in mid-conversation, mid-crisis, mid-something you don't understand yet, and that's exactly the point. The editing doesn't hold your hand. It drops you into the deep end and lets the sequence of cuts do the storytelling. Transitions between timelines are handled like magic tricks. A blinking streetlight here, a passing train there, a spinning camera shot that settles into a completely different version of reality. Seamless doesn't even begin to cover it. One moment Jules is in a cafe, the next they're in a hospital room staring at someone who's never met them before, and it all happens in a single, uninterrupted motion. No dialogue, just visual rhythm. Now, the pacing. This film isn't afraid to play with speed. In fact, it weaponizes it. There are sequences where scenes hit you like rapid-fire memories, bam, 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 flashes of different timelines, emotions, decisions, all cut together in a dizzying montage that feels like you're inside someone's spiraling mind. Then, just when your heart rate peaks, it slams the brakes. We get these quiet, suspended moments where everything slows down, the edits stretch, and we're forced to sit with the weight of a choice or the echo of a lost connection. It's all about contrast. The fast parts make the slow parts deeper. The silence after chaos feels louder because of the pacing. It's like emotional whiplash, and it's done on purpose. And this isn't just for style. The pacing actually mirrors the emotional arc of the film. Early on, everything moves in short, uncertain bursts, like the characters themselves are unsure where the story is going. The edits are quick, clipped like breathless moments strung together. But as Jules starts to understand the pattern of the timelines and dig deeper into what's really going on, the film's rhythm shifts. Scenes linger. Cuts become more deliberate. Flashbacks don't feel chaotic. They feel like revelations. The editing adjusts to the characters' understanding of reality, syncing the audience with their emotional state without ever saying it out loud. One particularly genius bit of editing comes in the form of repetition with variation. The same scene, or parts of it, play out multiple times in different timelines, but the edits focus on different details each time. First, it's a wide shot. Then, it's a close-up of a tear. Then, it's a subtle hand gesture that changes everything. By the third or fourth time you've seen a scene, it feels totally new because the editors are guiding your attention like magicians redirecting a trick. It's storytelling through rhythm, not just content. There's also an incredible use of audio overlap. Sound from the next scene sometimes starts before the cut happens. You hear a voice, a laugh, a siren bleeding into the previous moment, and it creates this dreamy, disjointed sense of movement through time. You're not watching a series of events. You're flowing through them, like memory or déjà vu. That blending of moments gives the film a hypnotic, immersive quality. It pulls you deeper with every transition. But the real star move of the editing? It knows when not to cut. That's the secret sauce. In the biggest emotional moments, when Jules is finally facing a version of Cam they've lost 100 times, the camera doesn't flinch. No fancy edits. Just long takes. Breathing room. You're forced to sit in the discomfort, the hope, the regret. It's brave editing, restraint used as impact. So no, this isn't your average, neatly chaptered sci-fi drama. This is a film where time itself becomes an editing tool, where pacing isn't just about speed but about emotional momentum, and where cuts aren't just technical, they're thematic. The rhythm of the film dances between panic and stillness, confusion and clarity, always keeping you just slightly off balance and completely captivated. You don't watch Hurry Up Tomorrow. You get swept up in its current. 8. Soundtrack and score. Let's tune into the soul of Hurry Up Tomorrow, because if there's one element of this film that sneaks up on you and completely takes over your emotional circuitry, it's the soundtrack. This isn't just background music humming politely while scenes unfold. This is a fully integrated, mood-sculpting, memory-activating, emotionally intrusive soundscape that grabs you by the heart and drags you through time. Literally. The music in this film doesn't just accompany the story, it coexists with it. It breathes with it. It fights with it. It falls apart and reassembles itself just like the plot and characters. Right from the start, the opening notes set the tone. We're not talking about some grand orchestral explosion or overly dramatic, piano-heavy melancholy. The film opens with this strange, layered electronic motif, part heartbeat, part broken lullaby, part digital hum that almost sounds like the universe trying to remember a forgotten song. It feels glitched, like something nostalgic being played on corrupted tape. That's the mood of the whole film, really, familiar and distorted. And it stays with you. Throughout the movie, the score plays with contrast in clever, emotional ways. During the big timeline transitions, or when reality gets a little fuzzy, the music leans hard into ambient distortion. Think low-frequency pulses, reverse notes, and sudden swells that never quite resolve. It makes everything feel fragile, unstable. But just when you start to feel unmoored, the music pulls a trick. Boom! In comes a melody that cuts through the haze like clarity. A solo cello. A fragment of a music box. A ghostly hum of a chorus that seems to echo a memory we haven't seen yet. These little motifs come back again and again, reworked, reshaped, recontextualized. That music box tune? By the end of the movie, when it plays again with different instrumentation, slower, richer, sadder, it lands like a punch to the gut. The use of recurring motifs is masterful. Each main character seems to have a sound signature, not an obvious hero theme, but more like an emotional fingerprint. Jules gets this wavering synth pad that rises and falls in unpredictable patterns, reflecting their mental state. Cam's presence is often marked by subtle piano chords that seem hopeful but never quite resolve, always missing one final note. When the two characters share a scene, their musical motifs blend in the background, sometimes clashing, sometimes harmonizing depending on the emotional tone. It's not just clever, it's storytelling through sound. And then there's the silence. Oh yes, the film knows when to shut up. Some of the most powerful moments aren't scored at all. There are scenes, especially the intimate, painful ones, where the music fades out completely, leaving only ambient sounds. The buzz of a streetlight, the creak of floorboards, breathing. The absence of music becomes its own kind of score, making every small sound feel amplified, almost sacred. It forces you to lean in, to feel the weight of the moment without any musical hand-holding. The silence in this film isn't empty, it's loaded. That's not to say the soundtrack avoids bold moves. There are a few absolutely standout musical pieces that crash through the movie like emotional tsunamis. One mid-film scene, a chaotic spiral of collapsing timelines and fractured memories, is set to a track that sounds like a string quartet being sucked into a black hole. It's wild, it's dissonant, it's brilliant. But instead of overwhelming the visuals, it syncs perfectly with the editing and pacing, becoming part of the moment's emotional architecture. You're not just watching the scene, you're feeling it on a cellular level. Outside of the score, the film also makes smart use of diegetic sound, music that exists within the world of the story. A song playing on the radio in one timeline is heard again, slightly altered, in another. An old recording that Jules listens to becomes a haunting motif later in the score. These touches make the world feel layered, lived in, and cyclical. Time is a loop and the music knows it. What's so compelling about the soundtrack in Hurry Up Tomorrow is that it never feels like it's trying to steal the spotlight. It's not there to tell you what to feel. It's there to enhance what you're already feeling, or to push you into an emotional state you didn't see coming. It's part lullaby, part horror score, part memory echo. It's subtle, bold, beautiful, broken, and utterly unforgettable. In a movie all about time bending, memory fracturing, and emotional unraveling, the music is the string that ties it all together. Sometimes that string is taut and delicate. Sometimes it snaps. Sometimes it tangles into a knot that's more honest than any line of dialogue. That's the magic of this film's score. It's not just heard. It's felt. And once it gets into your head, it doesn't leave. 9. Themes and messages. If you thought Hurry Up Tomorrow was just a slick sci-fi puzzle with timeline gymnastics and emotional roller coasters, think again. This film isn't just playing with time for the thrill of it. Beneath all the mind-bending visuals and alternate realities lies a thick, tangled web of themes that hit you right in the chest. And they don't tap politely on the door of your consciousness. They barge in, make themselves at home, and start asking the uncomfortable questions. At its core, this film is obsessed with one big question. If you could do it all over again, would you actually change anything, or would you just break yourself trying? Let's start with the theme of regret. It practically soaks every scene. Jules isn't just timeline hopping for fun. They're haunted by all the what-ifs that pile up from a past they can't seem to escape. It's not just one mistake they're trying to fix. It's a dozen tiny ones that snowballed into a life that doesn't feel like their own anymore. And that's what makes the film hit so hard. Because who hasn't replayed a conversation in their head, wishing they'd said something different? Who hasn't wished they could undo one moment and stop a relationship, a friendship, a future from slipping away? The film turns that very human instinct into an entire story structure, and then shows us how chasing perfect versions of the past can slowly erase who you are in the present. Then there's identity. Huge theme. Jules isn't just navigating timelines, they're confronting versions of themselves that made wildly different choices. Some are brave, some are scared, some are cruel, some are kind. Some are unrecognizable. It becomes less about what if I had done that instead, and more about am I even still me? The film plays with this idea beautifully, forcing Jules to stare down their own potential and wrestle with the uncomfortable truth that there isn't one right version of yourself. You're made of contradictions. You're every choice you didn't make, every door you never opened, and somehow still only one person trying to live with it all. It's identity as a constantly shifting collage, not a fixed point. And it's unsettling in all the best ways. Love and memory are also front and center, but not in a sappy way. This film's idea of love is messy, bittersweet, and absolutely riddled with emotional landmines. Jules and Cam's connection is the heart of the film, but it's not presented as some fairy tale constant. It's fragile. It mutates across timelines. In one version, they're soulmates. In another, strangers. In another, heartbreak frozen in time. The message is loud and clear. Love can be transformative or destructive depending on when you find it, and how honest you're willing to be with yourself. And memory? It doesn't just serve the plot. It becomes its own theme. The film keeps asking, can you trust your memories? Or are they just emotionally tinted reconstructions? Are they a source of healing, or a trap that keeps you from moving on? There's also a brilliant, sneaky undercurrent of control versus chaos running through everything. Characters scramble to fix their lives, to nail down cause, and affect like they're solving a puzzle. But the film keeps disrupting that idea. There are timelines where Jules does everything right, and things still fall apart. There are moments where the most random choices lead to peace, and the most logical ones lead to ruin. It forces you to wrestle with the idea that life isn't something you solve. It's something you live. It doesn't give you control. It gives you chances, and not always the ones you want. And then there's the big existential punch. What does it mean to let go when you can see all your possible lives, all your paths, all your versions? How do you choose just one? How do you commit to the now when the past keeps knocking and the future won't sit still? The film doesn't spoon-feed the answer, but it nudges you toward one. Letting go isn't giving up. It's choosing to stop bleeding for a version of yourself that never existed. It's the bravest, hardest kind of acceptance. What's stunning is how these themes don't feel bolted on like some post-production philosophy. They're baked right into the structure, the character arcs, even the visuals and sound. The more Jules spirals through time, the deeper we sink into questions about self-worth, emotional resilience, and what it means to live with the mess of our choices. It's not just cerebral, it's gut-wrenching. You don't leave this film thinking, cool effects. You leave thinking, I need to call someone I haven't talked to in years, or maybe I've been holding on to that guilt too long. It's the kind of movie that crawls into your thoughts days later and whispers, what if you're still becoming who you're meant to be? That's what Hurry Up Tomorrow does with its themes. It doesn't preach. It probes. It turns your own thoughts and emotions into part of the story. And it doesn't let you off the hook. 10. Visual effects and CGI. Strap in, because Hurry Up Tomorrow is a visual playground that doesn't just rely on CGI to dazzle. It uses it like a narrative tool, like a character in its own right. From the very first frame, this film makes it clear. You're not in the real world anymore. You're in a layered, glitched-out, time-fractured kaleidoscope where reality bends, snaps, overlaps, and reassembles itself constantly. And what's wild is how natural it all feels. The visual effects don't scream for your attention. They melt into the story's fabric. One minute you're watching a quiet conversation on a rainy street. The next, the street folds in on itself, like it's trying to rewrite history. And somehow, it just works. Let's talk about the time distortions, because wow, this film doesn't just play with time. It warps it like a DJ remixing reality in real time. You don't get traditional flashbacks or predictable fades to sepia.
No.
You get entire rooms that ripple like water as memories bleed through the walls. You get dialogue echoing in reverse, as if the past is literally speaking back. One particular sequence, where Jules walks through an abandoned house and different timelines project onto the walls around them like holographic ghosts, is a jaw-dropper. It's not just visually stunning, it's emotionally overwhelming. And that's where the film nails it. The effects aren't just cool, they're deeply tied to the characters' mental states. The more unstable Jules becomes, the more the world shimmers and fractures around them. It's not just showing what's happening, it's feeling it. And then there's the portal transitions. These aren't your basic flashy swirls or sci-fi wormholes. They're quiet, haunting, almost organic. Sometimes the air just bends, like heat rising from asphalt, and suddenly you're somewhere else. Sometimes it's as subtle as a mirror's reflection blinking out of sync. And when things do go big, like when entire buildings collapse into themselves, or time loops physically rewind the world like a rewound VHS, it's so tightly choreographed that you don't question it for a second. The CGI doesn't feel like an effect layered on top of reality. It is the reality. It shifts and stutters in ways that make you question what's real in the best possible way. Now, let's give some love to the practical effects too, because this film doesn't just lean on digital wizardry. The production design and tangible, in-camera trickery are top tier. There are props, locations, and costume changes that subtly signal shifts in timelines, and you don't even catch them at first. It's only later, when you're mentally replaying scenes, that you realize the bookshelf was flipped or the scar was on the other side of their face. It's that level of detail that makes the whole thing feel grounded, even when everything else is collapsing into visual chaos. The blending of practical and digital is so seamless, you're never quite sure where one ends and the other begins, and that ambiguity is totally intentional. And can we talk about how the film uses glitching as an aesthetic language? It's not just a visual quirk. It's thematic. Time loops don't just look like loops, they glitch. Colors smear. Faces blur for a split second. Objects flicker between versions of themselves. It's like watching your own memories corrupt in real time. One of the boldest effects is when a character tries to remember a moment and the world physically stutters, repeating a motion or a line of dialogue with eerie syncopation. It's uncanny and beautiful all at once. There are also quieter visual touches that elevate the experience. Windows that reflect the wrong timeline. Shadows that move independently. Raindrops that freeze in midair like time paused to catch its breath. These aren't flashy, blockbuster-type effects. They're whispers of weirdness, little nudges that remind you nothing is stable here. The more you notice, the deeper you fall into the world. What makes the CGI in Hurry Up Tomorrow so successful isn't the budget or the spectacle, it's the emotional precision. Everything you see is tied directly to how the characters feel. When things are hopeful, the visuals feel light, almost lucid. When despair hits, the entire color palette shifts and effects turn heavy, glitchy, distorted. It's like the world is reflecting their inner chaos. The visual language is emotionally reactive, not just aesthetically pleasing. It's mood-driven magic. In a landscape crowded with CGI-heavy films that feel more like showreels than stories, Hurry Up Tomorrow is the rare gem that uses visual effects to amplify the soul of the film. It's not just eye candy, it's emotional architecture. It's the subconscious brought to life. And as you're watching walls melt, skies fracture, and time reverse in real time, you're not thinking about how they did it. You're too busy feeling what it means. 11. Set design and locations. The world of Hurry Up Tomorrow is not just something you watch, it's something you fall into. Every room, street, alley, and ruin in this film doesn't just serve as a backdrop. It feels like a memory, a decision, a version of reality quietly whispering its own secrets. From the very first scene, the set design starts pulling you into this fractured universe where time loops, branches, and bleeds into itself, and the spaces reflect that emotional and narrative chaos in ways that are both subtle and absolutely stunning. Let's start with the core setting that anchors much of the film, Jules' apartment. On the surface, it looks like any cozy, lived-in space. But the details change depending on the timeline. Sometimes the plants are thriving, sometimes they're withered. Sometimes a photo frame has two people, sometimes only one. And you might not notice at first, but that's the genius. The production design plays with continuity like a magician, nudging your subconscious to feel that something's off before your brain catches up. It's not flashy, it's eerie, like déjà vu you can't quite explain. That apartment becomes a kind of emotional barometer, changing slightly with each version of Jules, each choice they make. It tells you their story, without them ever having to speak a word. Then there's the cafe, a recurring location that shows up in multiple timelines. But this isn't some cookie-cutter coffee shop. It's designed to feel timeless and strange, like a familiar place dipped in dream logic. In one version, it's bustling, warm, full of chatter and color. In another, it's dim, almost abandoned, and the paint is peeling off the walls. Same location, but the atmosphere shifts with the weight of the scene. You can feel whether Jules is clinging to hope or drowning in regret just by the color of the lighting or the placement of a chair. The locations in this film aren't static. They morph like living things, responding to the characters' emotions like a silent chorus. And then come the wilder sets, the ones that feel like stepping into Jules' subconscious. There's a corridor of mirrors that seems to stretch infinitely, reflecting not just different angles, but different versions of Jules entirely. There's an old train station frozen in time, littered with clocks that tick in different directions. There's a rooftop drenched in unnatural twilight, as if time itself paused to eavesdrop. Each of these locations isn't just a cool idea. They're deeply symbolic, drenched in metaphor, and crafted with such care that you get the sense every prop was placed with surgical precision. The use of props is equally layered. Watches are everywhere in this film, not just as symbols of time, but as emotional triggers. One scene shows a cracked wristwatch that still ticks, and somehow it says more about resilience and regret than an entire monologue could. Journals, notes, keys, half-burned letters. All these objects show up again and again, sometimes in the same spot across timelines, sometimes in totally new contexts, creating this uncanny feeling of repetition with variation. It's like the set itself is looping, trying to figure out what version of reality sticks. Even the outdoor locations are designed with intention. Urban landscapes feel cold, sterile, geometric when things are falling apart, and then, bam, Jules walks through a park where the wind blows backwards and birds take off in slow motion, and suddenly you're reminded that time isn't linear here. The film uses real-world settings in strange, off-kilter ways, changing the lighting, angling the camera, introducing just one wrong detail to make the familiar feel alien. It's uncanny but beautiful, like reality got rewritten just slightly and left the original draft smudged underneath. And let's not forget the transitions between these worlds. It's not just a fade to black or a jump cut, it's a full sensory shift. You'll be in one location, and suddenly the wallpaper changes pattern mid-scene. Or a door opens, and the world behind it isn't the hallway you expected. It's the same place but from a different lifetime. That's not just clever editing. It's a marriage of production design and storytelling that takes full advantage of the medium. The craftsmanship behind the set design in Hurry Up Tomorrow doesn't just create a believable world. It creates many believable worlds, all slightly wrong, slightly beautiful, slightly haunted. And that's the magic. You're not watching a film set. You're exploring a series of parallel realities, each one etched into the architecture, baked into the paint, and whispered through every carefully placed object. The environments aren't just physical, they're psychological. You don't just see them, you feel them. 12. Dialogue and script. Let's just say this. Hurry Up Tomorrow doesn't waste a single word. Every line of dialogue feels like it was forged in a lab of emotion, meaning, and mystery. It's the kind of script where even a simple, "I'm fine" lands like a gut punch, because you know it means the opposite. The writing dances this brilliant tightrope between the natural and the surreal. Characters speak like real people, but every so often, the words slip into something deeper, something mythic, like they're channeling ideas that stretch beyond time. It's a film that knows how to write a conversation that sounds like two humans figuring each other out, and then twist it into something that sounds like two timelines arguing through their avatars. The most impressive thing about the dialogue is how well it hides its own complexity. Characters say things that seem casual, almost throwaway, but later you realize those lines were clues, echoes from earlier or hints at what's coming. It's a script that rewards attention, not by throwing jargon or exposition at you, but by lacing its words with patterns and rhythms that reflect the looping, fragmented structure of the story. You hear the same phrase in different contexts, and it means something new each time. There's one recurring line that pops up in various forms. You can't fix the past, but it'll fix you if you let it. And it becomes this emotional boomerang, circling back with more weight every time it's said. You don't just remember it because it sounds good. You remember it because it changes every time.
Wit?
Oh, it's there. Not laugh-out-loud comedy, but that dry, smart, razor-sharp kind of wit that makes you smirk and go, okay, that was clever. It's especially great when two versions of the same character are talking to each other and their personalities clash. There's one sequence where Jules is essentially arguing with a future self, and it plays like an existential stand-up routine with real stakes. The tension is high, but the writing finds these strange, witty beats in the middle of it. They joke about bad fashion choices in alternate timelines, or who had the worst haircut at age 16, all while discussing irreversible choices that broke their lives. It's genius because it feels real, because even in moments of crisis, people are funny. It's a script that understands that humanity isn't all angst or wisdom. It's a mess of humor, pain, sarcasm, hope, and regret, often all in the same sentence. There's also this poetic undercurrent in the writing that creeps up on you, not in an overly stylized or forced way, but in how it captures emotion through rhythm. Someone says, "Time doesn't heal, it loops," and every loop cuts deeper. That's the kind of line you write down not because it's flashy, but because it sticks to your ribs. The script knows how to sound profound without sounding fake. It's got soul without ever tipping into melodrama. The emotional weight of the script is something else entirely. There are entire scenes where characters don't say much, but when they do, it feels like the air shifts. A single sentence can carry the baggage of entire lifetimes, because in this film, it often does. There's a scene where Jules meets someone they've lost across timelines, and the conversation is so simple, talking about books, the weather, music, but every word is dripping with unspoken grief and what-ifs. It's masterclass level restraint. The script trusts the audience to feel what's not being said, and that makes what is said all the more powerful. Another brilliant element is how the dialogue works hand in hand with the structure. Because of the time-looping, alternate paths premise, the script plays with repetition, but not in a lazy way. No line is repeated exactly the same. The phrasing changes, the inflection shifts, the context twists. A line you first heard in a hopeful scene might come back in a devastating one, and the change breaks your heart. It's not just clever, it's emotionally surgical. The writing doesn't just explore time, it weaponizes it. And then there are those rare moments where the characters break through the story's weirdness and speak with disarming clarity. Raw, honest, vulnerable. There's one scene where a character says, "I kept trying to fix everything, but maybe I was just trying to undo myself." It's not flashy. It's not wrapped in metaphor. It's just a person, finally saying what they've been hiding the entire film. And it hits like a thunderclap because the script earns it. In short, this isn't one of those films where the dialogue just pushes the plot along. In Hurry Up Tomorrow, the dialogue is the plot. It carries the emotion. It hides the clues. It builds the world. It fractures and repairs the characters. And most of all, it stays with you long after the credits roll, not because it's trying to be quotable, but because it's trying to be honest. Even when it's weird. Even when it's looping through impossible timelines. It's a script that listens to its characters before asking them to speak. And somehow, that makes every word count twice. 13. Genre execution. Now this is where Hurry Up Tomorrow gets really fun because it doesn't just step into one genre and play by the rules. Oh no, it rips the genre manual into little pieces, rearranges the letters, and turns it into a time-bending origami swan that stares into your soul. At first glance, sure, it looks like a sci-fi drama about time loops and alternate realities. But once you're inside it, the film morphs, slips through categories, and ends up being this kaleidoscope of genre elements that somehow still fits together with mind-bending precision. Let's start with the sci-fi part. Yes, we've seen time travel films before. But Hurry Up Tomorrow doesn't treat time travel as just a cool plot trick to create spectacle. It treats time like a character. Like a villain, a lover, a god, a curse. The mechanics aren't explained with clunky exposition or chalkboard diagrams. The film trusts you to feel the rules emotionally rather than intellectually. The sci-fi is more conceptual than technological. It's not about building a machine, it's about the cost of breaking the rules of time. That's a big swing, and it pays off because it makes the science feel like mythology. It's not a genre device. It's a storytelling language. Then you've got the drama, rich, layered, and beautifully human. This is not one of those movies that throws in emotional scenes just to pad the runtime. The drama is baked into the premise. Every choice, every leap between timelines comes with personal stakes. Regret, grief, identity, self-worth. All those juicy emotional ingredients are marinated in the fabric of the film. There are moments of pure heartbreak, not because someone dies or something explodes, but because a character realizes they can't fix who they were in another life. And that hurts.
Deeply.
But that's also what makes the drama feel real. It's not forced or formulaic. It's existential, messy, and weirdly intimate. But wait, just when you think the film is getting too heavy, boom, it hits you with this quiet, bone-dry humor. Not laugh-out-loud punchlines, but those little moments that feel so awkwardly real, you can't help but chuckle. Like when Jules meets a version of themselves who became a motivational speaker, and they're both mortified. Or when a time loop resets mid-argument, and the characters have to start bickering all over again, trying to remember what they were angry about. That's comedy through concept. It doesn't derail the tone, it enhances it. The humor peeks out like a glitch in the Matrix, unexpected, welcome, and just the right amount of absurd. And oh, the suspense. It's not action movie suspense with car chases and ticking bombs. It's philosophical suspense. The kind that creeps up on you when you realize a character's about to make the same mistake again, and this time, there might not be another chance to undo it. There are moments where two timelines are about to collide, and you can feel the dread, not because there's danger, but because there's truth waiting on the other side. It's like watching someone walk into a memory they've been avoiding. The stakes aren't just about who lives or dies. It's about who learns. That's rare. And let's not forget how the film messes with structure. Most genre movies stick to a rhythm: setup, conflict, resolution. But Hurry Up Tomorrow loops, stutters, rewinds, fast-forwards. It takes the rhythm of traditional storytelling and turns it into jazz. Scenes echo each other across timelines, character arcs spiral inward instead of upward, and resolutions are reframed again and again. It's bold, but it works because the film never loses sight of its emotional center. No matter how weird it gets, it stays rooted in the characters' emotional journeys. That's the genre-bending magic right there. Does it rely on cliches? Not really. In fact, it takes the cliches you expect from time travel or parallel universe stories, changing the past, erasing mistakes, becoming the better version of yourself, and flips them upside down. Instead of glamorizing the idea of fixing everything, the film digs into the uncomfortable question. Asterisk, what if you can't? What if you shouldn't? Asterisk, and that gives it a philosophical weight that's rarely explored in this genre. It's not about escaping the loop. It's about understanding it. So yes, Hurry Up Tomorrow flirts with multiple genres: sci-fi, drama, thriller, comedy, even a little romance, but instead of diluting them, it layers them like a time-warp lasagna. Every flavor complements the others. Every tone shift feels intentional. And through it all, the film keeps asking one powerful question. If you could see all your possible selves, who would you choose to be? And that, my friend, is how you take genre conventions, toss them in a blender, and serve up something unforgettable. 14. Social and cultural commentary. Now here's where Hurry Up Tomorrow starts to feel like more than just a mind-bending story. It starts to feel like a mirror. Not the kind of mirror that shows you how your hair looks, but the kind that makes you stare at yourself a little too long until you start asking questions you weren't ready to answer. This film doesn't preach. It doesn't wave a flag or write slogans in the sky, but it does something much more powerful. It quietly embeds its commentary into the very structure of its story and the choices its characters make. The social and cultural threads are there, simmering under the surface, waiting for you to pick them apart. And once you do, you realize this film is having a very real conversation with the world we live in. Take Identity, for example. In a film full of alternate versions of the same person, it dives deep into the question of who we are versus who we could be. That's not just science fiction brain candy. That's a reflection of modern life, where every scroll through social media shows you 50 other lives you could be living. The film taps into that anxiety with eerie accuracy. Jules doesn't just meet other versions of themselves, they confront better, worse, sadder, lonelier versions. Some who succeeded by giving up their values, others who lost everything by standing their ground. It becomes this brutal internal tug-of-war between ambition, authenticity, and acceptance. And isn't that the exact pressure cooker our generation is stuck in? Then there's the film's commentary on time, not just as a sci-fi mechanic, but as a cultural obsession. We live in a world addicted to urgency. Everything is about doing more, faster, better. But Hurry Up Tomorrow flips that on its head. It shows characters breaking themselves trying to fix the past or optimize the future, only to find that none of it matters if they're not present in their own lives. That's a subtle but sharp critique of hustle culture, perfectionism, and the commodification of progress. It's not just about time loops. It's about the psychological toll of never feeling like where you are is enough. And let's talk relationships, romantic, familial, platonic. All of them take center stage, not in some fluffy subplot way, but as battlegrounds for communication, regret, healing, and self-worth. One storyline involving Jules and a sibling they lost touch with across timelines becomes this raw metaphor for estranged relationships in real life. Not because of time travel, obviously, but because of all the what-ifs we carry. What if I had said the right thing? What if I hadn't let that fight end everything? The film doesn't spoon-feed that meaning, but it builds it with heartbreaking precision. On a broader cultural level, the movie also dips its toes into the waters of systemic commentary, especially through the lens of choice. Some versions of Jules thrive, others don't, and it's made clear that it's not just about personal decisions. It's about circumstance, privilege, luck, timing. One timeline hints that societal collapse forced characters into survival mode. Another shows a tech-dominated future where emotions are outsourced. These aren't just aesthetic world-building choices. They're reflections of very real fears about climate change, inequality, emotional alienation, and tech dependence. The beauty is, the film never screams message. It just shows you a world that feels familiar enough to make you uncomfortable. What's especially impressive is how the film handles its heavier themes without turning into a TED Talk with special effects. There's a moment where Jules witnesses a version of themselves being erased from existence, not by a villain, but by neglect. That's a sharp, quiet metaphor for people who feel invisible in society. And in another timeline, a character makes a morally gray choice to protect their family, raising questions about sacrifice, ethics, and survival. None of it is simplified. The film doesn't wrap its ideas in neat packages. It lets the mess sit there for you to deal with. And that makes the commentary land with much more honesty. It also dares to explore mental health, not in an after-school special way, but in a way that feels organic to the story. Multiple versions of Jules grapple with anxiety, depression, burnout, even disassociation. And rather than diagnosing these feelings, the film lets them live in the characters' actions. One version isolates. Another lashes out. Another seeks help. Another pretends everything is fine. And through all these versions, you get this unspoken acknowledgement that the human psyche is complex, fractured, and deeply affected by the world we live in. So yes, Hurry Up Tomorrow is about time travel and choices and weird paradoxes, but underneath all that, it's also about us. The world we've built. The choices we regret. The futures we fear. And the hope that somewhere, somehow, a better version of us is still trying. It's cultural commentary by way of emotional truth. It sneaks up on you, wraps itself in sci-fi clothing, and then taps you on the shoulder with 1,000 questions about who you are and who you might still become. 15. Audience engagement. From the moment Hurry Up Tomorrow begins, there's a strange kind of pull it has on you. Not the loud, in-your-face kind of pull that screams, "Watch me," with explosions and rapid-fire dialogue, but the quieter, almost hypnotic sort of gravity that gets under your skin and stays there. It's the kind of movie that doesn't just ask you to pay attention, it demands you live inside its questions. And as it does, it sparks a roller coaster of reactions, from audible gasps to long, stunned silences, and yes, the occasional "wait, what just happened?" that turns into a 45-minute conversation after the credits roll. Emotionally, this movie is a shapeshifter. It starts by setting you up with curiosity, drawing you into its layered world of parallel realities and choices not taken. But then it starts poking at things you didn't expect: regret, longing, identity crises, those quiet insecurities you thought you buried deep. There are scenes that hit like a freight train, not because they're loud or dramatic, but because they're true. One moment you're laughing at the awkward absurdity of two versions of Jules trying to give each other dating advice, and the next you're sitting with a version of them who just watched their entire life collapse in slow motion, and all you can do is feel it with them. It's a movie that understands how to use silence, stillness, and glances to rip your heart out just as easily as it uses words. There are definitely moments that shock. Not in the horror movie jump scare kind of way, but in the emotional gut punch kind of way. A character you've grown attached to simply vanishes from a timeline without warning. A scene rewinds and replays with just one small difference, and suddenly everything feels wrong. And there's one late movie reveal, so quietly delivered, that it rewrites your understanding of an entire subplot. You could hear a pin drop in the theater, followed by a collective whisper of "no way." That's the kind of engagement this film creates. Not just attention, but full-on investment. It's also a movie that practically begs for repeat viewings, and not in a "you missed a clue" kind of gimmicky way. It's more that the film operates on multiple levels at once: narrative, emotional, thematic, and you'll almost certainly latch onto a different layer each time. The first watch is about understanding the story. The second is about noticing the patterns. The third is about following the characters' emotional arcs. And by the fourth time, you're probably starting to write theories in a notebook about what the ending really meant and how many versions of Jules we actually saw. That's the beauty of it. Every viewing feels like opening a new timeline inside your own brain. And oh, does this film spark discussion? It's the kind of story that doesn't just end. It lingers. It haunts. It gets brought up in late-night conversations about life choices, in group chats with 10 tangled voice notes trying to unpack what really happened in the third act, in coffee shop debates about which version of Jules was the real one. It makes you think about your own life in ways you weren't expecting. What decisions brought you here? What regrets are you quietly nursing? What version of yourself are you most afraid to meet? These are the questions people leave the theater with, and that's exactly the kind of engagement great films aim for. It also connects across age groups and personalities in different ways. Younger viewers relate to the "what should I do with my life" panic baked into every choice. Older audiences see their past in the timelines not chosen. People who've lost someone find the scenes about alternate fates almost too real. Those dealing with anxiety or perfectionism see themselves in the way Jules tries again and again to get it right. The film never shouts, "Feel this," but somehow everyone does. That's a rare gift. In the end, Hurry Up Tomorrow doesn't just tell you a story. It makes you a participant. It invites you into its maze and dares you to care about timelines, about futures, but most of all, about people. And the more you care, the more the film gives you back in return. It doesn't end when the lights come up. It lingers. It evolves. And it stays with you, like a memory you can't quite place, from a life you may or may not have lived. 16. Comparisons to similar films. If you're a fan of movies that mess with your mind, time, and emotional stability all at once, Hurry Up Tomorrow is going to feel like being invited to the coolest, weirdest party in the multiverse. But the fun part is seeing where it fits on the shelf next to the other brain-bending films it'll inevitably get compared to, and spoiler alert, it doesn't just sit politely among them. It stretches the genre's limits, rolls its eyes at some conventions, and reinvents a few others entirely. Let's start with the obvious cousin: Everything Everywhere All at Once. Yep, multiverse fatigue is real, but Hurry Up Tomorrow handles it in a totally different way. Where Everything Everywhere goes maximalist, crazy visuals, googly eyes, hot dog fingers, and existential bagels, this film goes inward. It's more meditative than manic, more sit with your regrets than kung fu through your pain. While both explore identity and alternate selves, Hurry Up Tomorrow plays its emotional cards with quieter precision, like a whisper instead of a shout. It doesn't want to overload your senses. It wants to reroute your soul. Then there's Donnie Darko, that classic dose of surreal teenage dread wrapped in time loops and creepy rabbits. Hurry Up Tomorrow feels like its older, more introspective sibling. It has the same dreamy quality and existential undertones, but it trades in the chaos for clarity. Rather than focusing on unraveling what's really happening, it leans into how those surreal elements feel. It knows that confusion is part of the point, but unlike Donnie Darko, it's less about puzzle solving and more about emotional excavation. It's not, what is time doing? It's, what is time doing to you? You could also line it up next to Arrival in the thinking person sci-fi category. Both films treat time as a nonlinear beast, and both trust the audience to keep up without over-explaining. But where Arrival wrapped its themes in global stakes and alien languages, Hurry Up Tomorrow is intimate. It zooms in on one life fractured 100 ways and lets us feel the weight of every splinter. It's the difference between a satellite image and a handwritten letter. Christopher Nolan fans will undoubtedly draw parallels to Interstellar or Tenet, with all the time mechanics and temporal backflips. But this film doesn't try to impress you with how smart it is. It wants to connect with how human it is. It's like if Tenet took off its sleek, confusing suit and said, "Let's just talk about feelings for a minute." And the pacing, while deliberate, doesn't rush through big ideas or get tangled in its own rules. It lays its groundwork, then lets the characters do the heavy lifting, emotionally, not just expositionally. Even compared to other character-meets-versions of themselves stories, like Coherence, Mr. Nobody, or even The One I Love, this film stands out by refusing to become a twist machine. It's not obsessed with gotchas or reveals. It lets the strangeness of the setup deepen the realness of the story. The sci-fi is the frame, but the portrait inside is entirely human. You're not just watching a clever concept play out. You're watching characters bleed, laugh, break, rebuild, and quietly devastate each other with the words they almost didn't say. And then there's the director's own past work, which, if you know it, makes this film even more interesting. Let's say they came from thrillers or drama. This would feel like a bold, genre-shifting leap. If they had a more art house or experimental background, then Hurry Up Tomorrow feels like the culmination of all those quieter impulses refined into something more emotionally accessible, but still deeply personal. It's like watching an artist finally combine all their tools into one canvas. So yes, it shares DNA with a bunch of films you already love, but it doesn't just copy their homework. It rewrites the assignment. It's more grounded than Tenet, more introspective than Everything Everywhere, and more emotionally open than Dark. It offers a quieter, but no less profound ride through the multiverse, where the loudest revelations are the ones that sound like your own thoughts echoed back to you in a different voice. It doesn't just hold its own in the genre, it expands the genre's emotional vocabulary. 17. Symbolism and metaphors. Oh, buckle up for this one, because Hurry Up Tomorrow is practically built like a riddle wrapped in a metaphor dipped in a dream sequence. If you thought the plot was twisty, wait until you start peeling back the layers of symbolism. This isn't a film that just tells a story. It layers it with every object, every shadow, every line of dialogue potentially pointing to something deeper. It's like a scavenger hunt for your brain, and every time you think you've cracked one visual metaphor, another one strolls in with a smirk and a cryptic smile. Let's start with the clocks. Oh, the clocks. They're everywhere, but not in that cheap time travel movie 101 kind of way. Some are ticking backwards. Some are frozen. Some don't even have hands. One even melts in a blink and you miss it hallway scene. And yes, you'd better believe the internet's already deep diving that moment. But what's brilliant is that none of these are just aesthetic quirks. They reflect the character's internal chaos. Jules isn't just navigating multiple timelines. They're navigating the emotional consequences of time itself. Time lost, time feared, time wasted, time longed for. The broken clocks become this haunting, quiet visual chorus behind every choice they make. Mirrors play a huge part too, and not just as literal reflections. Sometimes they show things slightly off, details that shouldn't be there. Other times they refuse to show certain characters at all, like the mirror is choosing who gets to exist. There's one sequence where Jules stares into a mirror and sees multiple versions of themselves flicker in and out, each wearing a slightly different expression, and it's not just a cool VFX shot. It's a whole conversation about identity, regret, and how every decision births a new you. The mirror becomes a metaphor for multiplicity, but also for self-confrontation. Who are you really when you strip away what could have been? Then there's the recurring motif of the red string, subtle, barely mentioned. But once you notice it, it's everywhere. Tied around a wrist, hanging from a locker, threaded through the stitching of a jacket. It's a nod to the invisible threads that bind us to others, and maybe to the choices we can't quite escape. It evokes the myth of the red string of fate, sure, but in this film it takes on a more bittersweet tone. These connections don't always bring joy. Sometimes they tug at you from a timeline you'll never get back to, and that ache, beautiful, impossible to ignore, becomes part of the emotional landscape. Even the weather shifts carry metaphorical weight. Rain doesn't just fall when characters are sad. It falls when timelines begin to blur, as if reality itself is dissolving at the edges. The fog in one climactic scene seems to actively hide truths the characters aren't ready to face. And don't even get started on the lightning storm that opens the third act. It's not just spectacle. It syncs with the character's breakdown and suggests something cosmic is shattering right along with them. And if you're wondering whether the title Hurry Up Tomorrow is symbolic too, oh, absolutely. It's a phrase that gets spoken once, quietly, by a character who's stuck in a moment they desperately want to move past. It's about the ache of forward motion, the urge to escape the present pain by racing toward the next chapter. But the film keeps pushing back against that urge. It keeps whispering, what if tomorrow doesn't fix it? Or worse, what if tomorrow's already happened and you missed it? That tension becomes the film's heartbeat. Even the smallest elements carry symbolic heft. The paper airplane that keeps showing up? Not just a childhood memory, it's a message. The song that plays in reverse at key moments? It's not just eerie, it's a hint. The old vending machine that only dispenses expired candy? A surprisingly dark metaphor for nostalgia, trust me. The film doesn't scream its metaphors. It trusts you to listen closely, to dig in, to feel the pulse beneath the surface. In the end, the symbolism in Hurry Up Tomorrow isn't just decoration. It's a second language the film is speaking, layered underneath the dialogue, the visuals, and the plot. It's a language of grief, longing, possibility, and identity. And once you start to understand that language, the film opens up in a completely different way. It's not just about watching what happens, it's about noticing why it happens and what that tells you about yourself. 18. Franchise or historical context. Now, here's where things get really fun. Hurry Up Tomorrow isn't part of a traditional franchise in the Capes and Connected Universes sense, but if you squint just right, or if you've been paying attention to the filmmaker's past work, it sort of exists in a cinematic multiverse of its own. There are whispers, callbacks, Easter eggs, and subtle visual echoes that hint this story might be unfolding in the same universe as a couple of earlier, lesser-known indie darlings by the same director. That radio jingle in the background during the cafe scene? That's from a fictional company in their previous film. The faded mural in the train station? It's the same symbol that appeared on a mysterious notebook in their debut. It's like the director built a hidden narrative architecture across separate stories, and Hurry Up Tomorrow might just be the keystone that ties it all together, not loudly, but like a secret handshake for fans who've been watching from the beginning. But even beyond personal filmography, this movie plays with the idea of franchise in a meta way. It feels like a response to all the big sci-fi and time travel sagas we've consumed over the last couple of decades, where those often focus on saving the world, battling paradoxes, or locking horns with time itself. Hurry Up Tomorrow zooms in on the human scale, the quietest ripples caused by jumping timelines or revisiting alternate lives. It almost feels like a gentle rebellion against the high-octane, explosion-heavy franchises we're used to. It's like the film is saying, sure, multiverses are cool and all, but have you ever thought about what that means for your relationships? For your memories? For that one thing you regret, not saying 10 years ago? It's genre-savvy without being smug, and its position in the landscape of modern sci-fi gives it a kind of quiet authority. There's also a historical flavor to the way Hurry Up Tomorrow builds its world. Not historical as in period costumes and powdered wigs, but historical in how it layers real-world events into its backdrop. One of the alternate timelines flickers with Cold War aesthetics, faded propaganda posters, analog tech buzzing in quiet corridors, citizens whispering about the freeze. Another version of the world feels eerily stuck in a retrofuturistic 1970s, where people still fear the Y2K bug and microfiche is king. These aren't just quirky timelines, they're built with incredible texture, grounded in what might have been if history had taken just one different turn. It adds depth, giving the film a surreal kind of authenticity, like you've stumbled into a forgotten version of reality that still remembers you. The characters themselves often carry the weight of these alternate histories. One version of Jules remembers growing up during a war that never happened in our world. Another talks about a lost technology everyone feared, now buried in a vault that doesn't exist, except in their timeline. It shaped everything. These fragments create a sense that the film is not only telling its story, but echoing the stories of countless other films and timelines we never got to see. So whether or not it's technically part of a series, Hurry Up Tomorrow behaves like the anchor of something bigger, a constellation of stories, both real and imagined. It tips its hat to the time travel classics, flirts with alternate history, and whispers to its own cinematic siblings without ever losing its own voice. It doesn't just live in a context, it creates one, pulling from film history, genre tradition, and even speculative fiction tropes to build something layered, lived in, and weirdly familiar. It's like stumbling across an alternate timeline of cinema itself, and realizing you kind of wish you could stay there. 19. Budget and box office. Now here's where things get spicy, because Hurry Up Tomorrow didn't just play with your mind, it played with the numbers, too. This movie wasn't exactly made on a shoestring, but let's just say the budget wasn't swimming in nine-figure Marvel money either. It hovered somewhere in that sweet spot between indie darling and studio-backed gamble, just enough to hire top-tier talent, build wild multi-era sets, and render some seriously slick VFX, but not so much that the studio could afford to sit back and relax. Every dollar on screen had to pull its weight, and oh boy, did it do squats, lunges, and backflips. You watch this film and think, how did they do that on this budget? From the fluid timeline transitions to the shifting architecture in one scene that literally folds in on itself like a dream collapsing, it's clear the production team squeezed every drop of creativity out of their resources. Instead of throwing cash at everything, they picked their battles, smart battles. Minimalist sci-fi tech with clever sound design rather than expensive hardware. Optical illusions instead of green screen overload. Costuming that felt timeless across timelines, avoiding expensive redesigns for every jump. It's the cinematic equivalent of a magician working with thrift store props and still leaving you speechless. Now, let's talk box office. Opening weekend? A little quiet. It wasn't an immediate smash hit, more like a slow burn. But here's the thing. It grew like a strange plant in a time-bending garden. The buzz sprouted from early viewers who couldn't stop talking about it. Social media started glowing with cryptic quotes and wild fan theories. Articles with titles like, "What the ending of Hurry Up Tomorrow really means" flooded feeds. And suddenly, theaters weren't empty. They were buzzing with people coming back for second viewings, dragging friends who hadn't seen it yet, whispering, "Just trust me," as they bought extra popcorn. This word-of-mouth wave became its own kind of marketing machine, and what started as a modest release began climbing week after week. Some critics even dubbed it the little time travel epic that could, and by week 5, its box office was outperforming some big-budget franchise flicks released around the same time. Sure, it didn't dethrone the mega franchise monsters, but it punched way above its weight and earned itself a reputation as the smart sleeper hit of the year. And let's not forget the marketing campaign, equally cryptic and clever. Trailers were teasers in the truest sense. No exposition dumps, no flashy explosion montages. Just fragments of dialogue, glimpses of flickering clocks, and questions that begged you to sit in a dark room and find answers. They marketed the mystery, not the spectacle. And once the mystery grabbed hold of people, it never let go. Ultimately, Hurry Up Tomorrow proved that a tight budget doesn't mean small vision. With a clever creative team, a story worth unraveling, and a fanbase that practically became a street team overnight, It turned what could have been a modest footnote into a full-blown conversation piece. It became that movie people wouldn't shut up about, not because it made the most money, but because it made the smartest moves with the money it had. A budgetary paradox worthy of the film itself. The more limited it seemed, the more limitless it became. 20. Where to watch. Alright, you've made it this far into the multiverse. Now the real question is, where in this timeline can you actually watch Hurry Up Tomorrow? Good news, you've got options. And like everything else about this movie, how you choose to experience it might just change the way it hits you. So let's break it down, dimension by dimension. First up, the theatrical route. If you're lucky enough to catch it on the big screen, do it. Seriously. This film wasn't just shot cinematically, it was built for the immersive experience. The sound design alone deserves to echo around a dark theater, and those jaw-dropping timeline transitions? They hit different when you're surrounded by a wall of visuals and total silence just before the score swells. Plus, this is the kind of movie where you'll catch fellow audience members leaning forward in their seats at the same time you do. The energy in the room becomes part of the story. And when the credits roll and no one moves for a solid minute, that's a collective existential crisis, and it's weirdly beautiful. But say you missed the theatrical window or your town didn't get a wide release. No problem. Hurry Up Tomorrow is now streaming on select platforms. But don't go watching it casually while scrolling through your phone and folding laundry.
No.
This movie requires your full attention. It's a sit-down, lights off, phone in another room kind of watch. Put on headphones if you're streaming it alone. The layered sound design practically climbs into your brain through the audio channels. And do not, I repeat, do not try to watch it half awake at 2 a.m. unless you're emotionally prepared to stare at your ceiling afterward, questioning your place in the universe. If you're into digital rentals or own your copy forever vibes, yes, it's also available for purchase. And this is one of those rare films where buying it just makes sense. Not just because you'll probably want to rewatch it 3 more times, but because it comes with bonus features that are just as layered as the movie. Director's commentary? A must. Deleted scenes? More like alternate timelines the editor cut loose. Hidden visual Easter eggs you didn't notice the first time? All broken down in the extras. It's like unlocking a side quest in a really weird, emotional game. Some art house theaters are even doing special rescreenings and interactive showings, complete with discussions, and post-viewing theory circles. If that's your jam, look out for those events. This movie attracts a fan base that treats it less like a watch-once-and-move-on deal, and more like a cinematic ritual. There's even been buzz about an upcoming limited IMAX re-release with upgraded sound, because apparently the studio knows this film has legs, long ones, walking through every possible timeline to find its next audience. So whether you're catching it on the big screen, streaming it with your brain fully locked in, or digging into all the layered bonus content from a digital library, just make sure you give it space. Not just on your schedule, but in your head. This isn't background noise. This is foreground storytelling. However you watch Hurry Up Tomorrow, the key is to let it pull you in, flip you upside down, and drop you gently in a timeline where good stories still matter and great ones stick with you.